a little boy stood gazing at a picture of his father who had been away for several days on a business trip. He turned to his mother and said wistfully, "I wish Daddy could step out of that picture and be with us tonight." Drawing him close and giving him a hug, his mother replied, "I know, son, I do too." Probably all of us have felt like that at one time or another, that someone we love could somehow be with us, even though they were separated by miles or by the fact that they are no longer with us. That little boy expressed in his own way one of the deepest yearnings of the human heart, that God, our heavenly parent, would somehow come and be with us in a real and tangible and vital way. People everywhere are looking for God, my friends. They are looking in nature. They are practicing meditation and spiritual discipline. People are reading religious books of all types. They are delving into all kinds of experiments. They are looking for God in cults and on television and in personal growth groups. But for all the searching, most are missing the New Testament's obvious point that God is already with us, that God has made his presence known to us through the coming of Jesus, and God continues to reveal himself through his creative and life-giving activity in our midst. For those who have invested much time and energy in the search for spiritual peace and happiness, I have good news this morning. God can be found. God's presence is indeed in our midst. Christmas means that God is with us. Christmas means that God will continue to be with us even after the nativity set is tucked safely back in the attic until next year. That good news brings joy to our hearts, a happiness that cannot be bought in the store. It is a Christmas gift that will not break. Well, Christmas means that God has come to dwell with us. The problem is that we often have a hard time recognizing God's presence in our midst. Abraham Lincoln is now regarded as perhaps the greatest person of greatest moral stature that the 19th century produced. And yet, his greatness was garbed in such humility that most of his contemporaries missed it altogether. At that time, almost daily, the press carried intemperate attacks upon Lincoln's intelligence, his appearance, and his character. In the election campaign of 1874, less than a year before his assassination, the New York World published this paragraph, and I quote, "The age of statesmen is gone. The age of rail splitters and tailors, buffoons, bores, and fanatics has succeeded. In a crisis of almost appalling magnitude, this country is asked to consider the claims of two ignorant, boorish, third-rate, backwoods lawyers for the highest station in government. God save the Republic." End of quote. Well, my friends, God did exactly that. God saved the Republic with the help of one of those backwoods lawyers. Because of his simple and unpretentious manner, many of his contemporaries missed the greatness of Abraham Lincoln. In today's gospel lesson, John the Baptist has been put in prison because of his teachings. Matthew gives us an account of a very curious conversation. John wants to know, this man who is going about the countryside preaching and teaching, is he really God's Messiah? After all, John has done his best to prepare people for the coming of the Anointed One. He has risked life and limb. He has spared nothing in order to preach the word as he has understood it and perceived it. Now comes Jesus, not in the judgmental role that John the Baptist has anticipated and preached about, but instead as a gentle and a kind figure who spends more time eating with tax collectors and sinners than in condemning them, who accepts gifts from prostitutes rather than scolding them, who is concerned with little children, with old people, with the powerless, with the disenfranchised, as well as with the influential and the affluent. And so John sends word to Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?" Had Jesus been what John was expecting, a commanding presence who took control and really put people in their place, there would have been no need for that question, would there? Had Jesus made John a kind of deputy or assistant Messiah, John would probably have not thought twice about whether he was the one. But consider the circumstances, if you will. Here is Jesus taking a soft line on sin and wickedness, at least in John's opinion. And here is John in prison for his offensive preaching and his open criticism of everything and everybody. Frankly, John is a little confused. He expected Jesus to come in and pick up where he left off. Jesus is not fulfilling his expectations. Is he the one? Is he the Messiah? Or has John put his hopes in the wrong person? My friends, if we are honest, I think all of us will have to admit that at times we question our religion. Is it really true? Or are we foolish to believe in God? We talk about the coming of Jesus every year and the angel's message of peace on earth. We know the story. We shared it this morning. And yet we are probably no closer to world peace now than we have ever been. We hear Jesus restored sight to the blind and made the lame to walk. He cleansed the lepers and restored hearing to the deaf. And yet disease is still rampant in our world. A man said to me one Sunday after church, "I need healing," and so many people do. Jesus preached good news to the poor, and yet everywhere in our world today, we see hungry people, needy people, dispossessed and disenfranchised people, immigrants who have no place to go. For every ray of sunshine, there is a cloud covering the rest of the sky. We try to remain faithful, and yet our problems and our cares and our worries weigh us down. Sometimes we get so discouraged, we wonder whether there's any purpose to it at all, or whether we are just kidding ourselves. If we are honest, we will have to admit that, like John, we are not sure whether Jesus is the one. It is at this point that we need to hear the message of the gospel once again, for the clear teaching of the scriptures is that God is indeed present and active in our midst, that he is indeed making a difference in our world today. The point is sometimes that he is not what we are expecting, nor do we recognize his presence in our midst. Leo Tolstoy's story of Martin the Cobbler, the old man who is promised a visit by Jesus Christ himself, and yet encounters only ordinary people with ordinary problems from morning until night, is the story of your life and mine. Well, we are searching for the big and the spectacular, the overwhelming presence of the power of God. We discover in retrospect that God appears in the quiet, the ordinary, even the obscure places of life when we least expect him. He comes, as Martin the Cobbler learned, through the kind word, the understanding heart, the quiet sharing of a good deed done in simplicity and love. I shall never forget, now several years ago, we were having an Advent dinner at the church I was serving at the time. We exchanged names, and we were told to do something nice for the person whose name we had received between then and Christmas Day. We called it Secret Santas. That evening, while we were sitting together eating supper at a covered dish dinner, a little girl came up, and while an older man was looking the other way, she placed a cookie in the middle of his plate, a cookie that she had spent all afternoon decorating in the workshop that was held for the children. She giggled quietly and left the room. Someone observed the whole scene and was quick to say, "I bet she got that man as her secret Santa." That little girl set off a spark of joy that spread like electricity through that room this evening, and the room was not the same after she had left. We suddenly realized that in her excitement and joy, in the giving of herself, we had all experienced something of the presence and the power of God. Where can I find God? If I am looking at the spectacular, the lightning bolt, the heaven-opening experience, I may go a lifetime without finding God. But if I look in the common and the ordinary places, I will see God at work almost every time I take the time to look. Can I find God in the hymns and the lessons, the color and the pageantry of our Christmas worship? Indeed, I can. I find God first and foremost in the worship life of this community, in this place where we gather to find new insight, new hope, and new understanding of who we are called to be as Christian disciples. My friends, I find here the presence and the power of God. Where can I find God? I find God in the generous outpouring of love that caused members and friends of this Old Stone Church to take every name on the Christmas tree and to buy people for the people that are served by the Front Steps organization. I find God in those who are bringing supplies for the homeless stand-down, those who are staffing and supplying clothes through our Love Your Neighbor program here at Old Stone Church, those who are providing food and hospitality at our Sunday coffee hours, those who hand out groceries on Friday mornings here at the church, and the list goes on and on. Where can I find God? Can I find God in the hospital room, the sick bed, the nursing home, even when we are visited by the grim reaper of death? My friends, I do not answer glibly at this point, for the hurt we feel in our hearts is very real at those times. But I believe that when we share our cares and our grief with one another, God is in our midst, bringing comfort and endurance and hope. My friends, God is with us as we share each other's pain, when others help us to lift heavy burdens that are too heavy for us to carry by ourselves. My friends, I find God in you, in your prayers, in your tears, and in your warm embrace. Yes, God is with us. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised to new life, and the poor have good news preached to them. Where can I find God? In the simple things, the common and ordinary places, sometimes when I least expect Him. There was once a little girl who wanted to meet God. She knew that God lived far away, so she packed some cookies that her mother had made and started on her journey. After she had walked a few blocks, she came to a park where she saw an old man sitting by the pond. She approached him and offered him a cookie. The man responded with a big smile and graciously accepted the cookie. His smile was so warm and so friendly that she felt comfortable sitting down next to him. In a few minutes, she offered him another cookie, and again the man beamed with delight. Both sat quietly for a while, enjoying one another's company, and when the little girl left to go home, she gave the old man a big hug, and in return he gave her another one of those big, beautiful smiles. When the little girl got home, she excitedly told her mother that she had seen God that afternoon. and he had a most wonderful smile. She paused for a moment and then said, "But he was a lot older than I expected." Later on, the old man made his way back home and excitedly reported to his daughter when she got home from work, "I met God this afternoon." He paused and then reflected, "But she was a lot younger than I expected." Where can I find God? According to the New Testament, God looks like Jesus. And according to Jesus, God should look a little like each one of us. Can people see God in you? There was once an abbot of a monastery who was having a miserable time. The morale in his monastery was low, and it was getting worse by the day. The monks bickered with one another, and their faith life was weak and anxious and fearful. Because of the attitude of the brothers, rarely did folks visit that monastery anymore, and no new monks were joining the order. Finally, at his wits' end, the abbot invited what we today in our corporate world would call a consultant to come and visit the monastery. He asked the rabbi from a nearby village to come and live with them for a few days and then give his assessment. The rabbi agreed. After a few days of observing the community, the rabbi called the monks together for a meeting. And he said, "I have just one thing to say. The Messiah is among you." And with that, he left the monastery. Not only the abbot, but all the monks were taken back. "The Messiah is among us. Who might it be?" When the monks would pass each other in the hall, they would wonder, could it be Brother Paul? Could it be Brother John? Sitting in chapel praying, they would hear a voice and look intently at that face and wonder, is it Brother Sebastian? Is it Brother Timothy? Because the monks did not know who the Messiah might be, they began to treat each other differently. Instead of bickering, they began to treat the other brothers with kindness and respect and even reverence. The monastery was suddenly full of life, love, and grace. The prayer life of the brothers became rich and passionate. Their worship became alive and vibrant and full. My friends, word spread quickly, and soon folks were flocking to the monastery to get a glimpse of the monks, one of whom was said to be the Messiah. And many joined the community. Where can I find God? My friends, look to your right, look to your left. The Messiah is among us. Thanks be to God.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click Donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.